My fiancée insisted on an ironclad prenup to safeguard her future wealth, threatening to cancel the wedding if I didn't agree. I signed without a word. 3 years later, I hit a $5 million jackpot. When she demanded her cut, I calmly showed her the exact clause she had written herself. Even her lawyer had nothing to say. I never envisioned myself here, a 34-year-old man pouring out his marital demise on a public forum. Yet, within the hollow shell of our once shared apartment, I now sit, finally prepared to unfurl this narrative. My name is inconsequential, but the crucible of my past 3 years might just avert similar blunders for another, or perhaps, it's merely my own raw catharsis. Regardless, this truth demands to be spoken. It was the summer of 2019 when Danielle Prescott first entered my orbit, at a mutual friend's sun-drenched barbecue. She was 29, possessed of that captivating, almost ethereal beauty that could snatch words right from your tongue mid-sentence. Her career as a junior associate at a distinguished downtown law firm merely added to her formidable allure. Her pedigree, an unspoken weight, spoke volumes. Harold Prescott, her father, a titan who'd sculpted a flourishing chain of dental practices across the state. Lorraine, her mother, a scion of old money, her lineage tracing back 3 generations. Danielle inhabited a world where summer estates and burgeoning trust funds were the casual backdrop of conversation. My own beginnings were far more grounded, a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, my resilient mother Patricia, and my younger brother Wesley. Our father's departure when I was 7 etched a permanent line in our lives, leaving Mom to brave grueling double shifts as a nurse, just to ensure food graced our humble table. We may have lacked material abundance, but Mom's unwavering resilience ensured we always had enough. She instilled in me a fundamental truth, that hard work and unyielding integrity dwarfed any figure in a bank account. A truth I held dear then, and one I cling to even now. When Danielle and I began our courtship, I was an electrician, plying my trade for a small company. The pay was fair, the labor honest, and I genuinely enjoyed the tangible satisfaction of solving problems with my hands. Danielle, to my surprise, seemed charmed by what she termed my authenticity. Looking back, a chilling clarity descends. I believe she perceived me as a project, a malleable figure she could sculpt into her preconceived vision of success. At the time, though, I was simply flattered, utterly captivated that someone of her stature would even glance in my direction. Our relationship accelerated with startling velocity. Within 6 months, discussions of cohabitation filled our evenings. By the 1-year mark, I was meticulously shopping for engagement rings, siphoning every spare dollar from grueling overtime shifts. I eventually found a modest diamond, one that devoured 3 months of my hard-earned savings. It wasn't the 2-carat princess cut Danielle had mentioned in her subtly barbed hints, but I genuinely believed the profound gesture would eclipse any concern about carat weight. She said yes. And for a fleeting, beautiful moment, I truly believed we were destined to forge something extraordinary together. The engagement period, however, became an unwanted forensic examination, revealing fractures I desperately chose to interpret as mere growing pains. Danielle's mother, Lorraine, inserted herself into every single wedding decision with the chilling precision of a seasoned military strategist. The chosen venue, she decreed, had to unequivocally reflect the family's towering social standing. The guest list demanded meticulous curation, a careful inclusion of the right people, and the ruthless exclusion of anyone who might, God forbid, lower the tone. The catering, the floral arrangements, the music selection, the photographer, every single element required stringent approval from the formidable Prescott Family Council before any progression was permitted. My own humble contributions to the planning process were not merely tolerated, they were actively stifled. When I innocently suggested incorporating my Uncle Raymond's legendary barbecue ribs into the reception menu, Lorraine's expression morphed into one that suggested I'd proposed serving roadkill on heirloom china. She then explained, with an exaggerated, patronizing patience, that the Prescott family maintained established relationships with specific caterers, and deviating from those entrenched partnerships would, apparently, send the wrong message. I never did unravel what message barbecue ribs might convey, but I swiftly ceased offering any further suggestions. My mother, ever eager to help, attempted to shoulder some burden, offering to host the rehearsal dinner, a duty tradition typically assigned to the groom's family. Lorraine intercepted this kind gesture with surgical efficiency, explaining with saccharine sweetness that she'd already secured a reservation at the exclusive country club, and that Patricia, my mother, shouldn't worry herself about the details. The condescension, thick and cloying, dripped from every perfectly articulated syllable. My mother, who had single-handedly raised 2 sons while enduring 12-hour nursing shifts, was being casually dismissed, treated like an impudent hireling who had dared to overstep her station. I finally confronted Danielle about her mother's insufferable behavior one evening, after a particularly humiliating exchange where Lorraine had audaciously questioned whether my family members would even discern which fork to use at the reception. Danielle responded with a dramatic sigh, as if my concerns were utterly trivial, an exhausting imposition. She dismissed her mother's actions, claiming Lorraine meant well, and simply desired everything to be perfect. She subtly suggested I was being oversensitive, magnifying perceived slights that simply weren't there. This chilling conversation established a pervasive pattern that would, tragically, define our entire marriage. Whenever I voiced concerns about her family's dismissive treatment of me, Danielle would minimize, deflect, or artfully redirect the blame onto my own supposed insecurities. I wasn't being mistreated, you see. I was merely paranoid. Her parents weren't looking down on me. I was simply looking too hard for reasons to feel inferior. The fundamental problem, it seemed, was never their behavior. The problem, always, was my perception. Wesley, my ever-perceptive brother, pulled me aside at my bachelor party, a modest gathering he'd organized at a local bar, a stark contrast to the elaborate Vegas weekend Danielle's friends had proposed, an indulgence far beyond what my own actual friends could realistically afford. He looked me in the eye, his gaze piercing, and asked if I was truly certain about proceeding with this marriage. He confessed he'd witnessed me shrinking over the preceding months, observing me attempt to occupy less space, to become invisible, lest I inconvenience anyone. He reminded me that wasn't who I was, and his voice laced with genuine concern, he asked what was happening to me. I offered him the hollow assurances I'd been rehearsing for myself. I was fine, weddings were inherently stressful, and everything would undoubtedly settle down once we were officially married. He didn't believe me. And in my heart of hearts, I'm not sure I believed myself either. Then came the prenuptial conversation, a mere 2 months before the wedding. We were seated in her parents' cavernous living room, enveloped by furniture that likely cost more than my annual salary, when Harold Prescott dramatically cleared his throat and announced an important matter to discuss. Lorraine, with the practiced, almost predatory smile of someone who'd meticulously rehearsed this precise moment, handed me a manila folder. Inside lay a formidable, 23-page prenuptial agreement, meticulously drafted by the Prescott family's trusted attorney, a man named Gerald Whitmore, a specialist renowned for protecting generational wealth from gold diggers. The bitter irony of that description wouldn't fully land until much, much later. I spent that night alone in my apartment, poring over the document, my stomach churning as I highlighted passages that felt like a personal assault. The agreement was a comprehensive testament to profound distrust. Any inheritance Danielle received would remain solely hers. Any appreciation on her existing assets, solely hers. Any future earnings from her burgeoning legal career, solely hers. The opulent house her parents planned to gift us as a wedding present, solely hers. Even the car she might purchase during our marriage would, by legal decree, remain solely hers. But the clause that truly seared itself into my memory, nestled innocuously on page 17 between dense provisions about retirement accounts and intellectual property, was this. It stated in unambiguous legal language that any windfall, inheritance, lottery winnings, gambling proceeds, contest prizes, or unexpected financial gains received by either party during the marriage would remain the sole and separate property of the party who received it, with no claim by the other spouse, regardless of the circumstances of acquisition. I remember reading that paragraph 3 times, each pass deepening the chill in my bones, ensuring I fully grasped its chilling implications. Danielle wanted to ensure that if she ever won anything, inherited anything, or received any kind of unexpected money, I wouldn't be entitled to a single cent. While the clause was ostensibly mutual, applying equally to both parties, its underlying intention was chillingly clear. She was, unequivocally, protecting herself from me. My brother Wesley came over the next evening, and I spread the foreboding document before him. He read it slowly, his expression morphing from initial curiosity to outright disbelief, then settling into something akin to incandescent anger. He looked up, his voice tight, and asked if I was actually contemplating signing this monstrosity. He observed it read as if she expected me to pilfer her silverware the instant her back was turned. I, in my blind devotion, countered that I loved her, that marriages transcended mere money, that if signing a piece of paper brought her a sense of security, then what did it truly matter? We weren't marrying for financial gain, after all. Wesley simply shook his head, a gesture of profound disappointment, and declared I was making a grievous mistake. He warned, with a prescient gravity, that if someone necessitated a legal document to protect themselves from you before exchanging vows, their reasons for marriage were fundamentally flawed. He assured me I would live to regret this. I signed the prenup anyway. The night before affixing my name to that document, I sat alone in my apartment, allowing the full, crushing weight of my capitulation to settle upon me. The terms weren't merely unfair, they were a stark declaration of my utter expendability. If things irrevocably fractured, Danielle would emerge entirely whole. I, however, would be left with whatever meager assets I'd managed to accumulate independently, which, at that juncture, amounted to very little. But I deluded myself, convinced that signing was an act of profound faith. I whispered to myself that this prenup would never truly matter, because we would never, ever divorce. I believed that by accepting these terms without complaint, I was unequivocally demonstrating the boundless depth of my commitment. Danielle, I reasoned, would surely recognize that I loved her for her, not for her family's formidable wealth, and that profound proof would become the unshakable foundation of our marriage. Looking back, I now understand the tragic bargain I was truly making. I was desperately attempting to purchase her trust with my utter vulnerability. I believed that if I relinquished enough, sacrificed enough, endured enough unfair treatment, she would inevitably perceive my inherent worth and finally treat me accordingly. It's a transaction that, in truth, never yields fruit, yet desperate individuals make it all the time. At the ceremony, encircled by Danielle's sprawling, impressive guest list and my own modest gathering of family and friends, I genuinely harbored the conviction that we would defy every cynical expectation. Mom sat in the front row, discreetly dabbing her eyes with a tissue, her gaze brimming with a quiet pride, despite her unspoken reservations. Wesley stood as my best man, his toast meticulously crafted to deftly skirt any mention of the chilling legal document that hung like a silent shroud over the entire affair. The first year of our marriage tragically confirmed what the prenup had already subtly suggested. Danielle's perception of our partnership was transactional, far beyond what I had truly grasped during our engagement. She meticulously managed the finances, which, in reality, meant she unilaterally controlled the flow of every dollar. Her substantial salary funded her own robust retirement accounts, her lavish wardrobe, and her considerable personal savings. My salary, in stark contrast, exclusively covered the mortgage on the house her parents had gifted her, the utilities, the groceries, and the arduous maintenance on both our vehicles. When I tentatively suggested we open a joint savings account, she laughed, a brittle, mirthless sound, as if I'd uttered a foolish joke. She then explained, with an air of weary patience, that the prenup explicitly stipulated separate finances, and commingling our money would merely complicate things if we ever needed to audit the accounts. The word audit hung in the air, a cold, stark pronouncement. She wasn't planning for our shared future. She was meticulously preparing for its inevitable dissolution. Her parents' frequent visits became agonizing exercises in endurance. Harold, with unsettling regularity, would dissect my career trajectory, demanding to know when I planned to transition into something more professional than mere manual labor. The undeniable fact that I owned my own thriving business, employed other skilled individuals, and was meticulously building something substantial from scratch simply failed to register as a legitimate achievement within his rigidly defined framework. Lorraine, equally dismissive, would scrutinize the house with barely concealed disappointment, pointedly noting that certain rooms could use updating and audaciously wondering aloud whether I was contributing sufficiently to maintain the property properly. Danielle, astonishingly, never once defended me during these relentless interrogations. She would sit quietly, occasionally offering a tight, manufactured smile, as if my profound discomfort was merely an acceptable price to pay for her parents' fleeting approval. Sometimes, more painfully, she would even join in, agreeing that perhaps I should consider additional certifications, or casually mentioning that several of her colleagues' husbands had smoothly transitioned from trade work to management positions. The united front I had so desperately imagined building with my wife existed solely in my own yearning imagination. In harsh reality, I stood utterly alone against a family that had never, for a single moment, accepted me as an equal. I responded by burying myself in my work. I eagerly took on extra projects, diligently earned new certifications, and eventually, with immense pride, launched my own small electrical contracting business. It was neither glamorous nor ostentatious, but it was unequivocally mine. Danielle, on the surface, offered a veneer of support, though her encouragement always carried an insidious undercurrent of condescension. She would discuss my little company with her friends in the same dismissive tone one might employ to describe a child's amateur lemonade stand. My mother, with her discerning eye, noticed the profound change in me during our monthly dinners. She observed that I appeared perpetually tired, a weariness that no amount of sleep could ever truly remedy. She remarked that I looked like a man shouldering an invisible weight I hadn't chosen. When she gently inquired about my happiness, I offered her the meticulously rehearsed answer, that marriage was work, and we were figuring things out. She didn't push, but the profound concern never truly dissipated from her knowing eyes. There were fleeting moments when I almost convinced myself that things were, indeed, improving. Danielle could, on rare occasions, be utterly charming when circumstances perfectly aligned with her exacting expectations. She'd surprise me with coveted tickets to a baseball game or suggest we explore a new, fashionable restaurant she'd read about. During these brief, cherished windows of warmth, I'd vividly recall precisely why I had fallen for her in the first place: her incisive intelligence, her effortless confidence, the captivating way she could command an entire room simply by entering it. I'd allow myself to think that perhaps I'd been overly harsh in my private assessments, that every marriage demanded constant adjustment and continuous compromise. Then, without warning, something would shift, and the pervasive coldness would return. A sharp, dismissive comment about my appearance before one of her exclusive work events. An exasperated, guttural sigh when I innocently inquired about weekend plans. The particular, chilling tone she reserved for those moments when I'd irrevocably failed to meet some unspoken, often unknowable, expectation. I learned, with painstaking precision, to navigate these turbulent fluctuations, constantly adjusting my behavior to minimize friction, becoming smaller, less conspicuous, to avoid yet another painful collision. The second year introduced a new, unsettling dimension to our already pervasive dysfunction. Danielle began mentioning children with escalating frequency, framing the entire conversation around rigid timelines and logistical considerations, rather than any genuine desire or profound love. She envisioned 2 children, preferably before her 35th birthday, and had already meticulously researched the most elite private schools in the area. The children, in her mind, existed as mere accomplishments to be ticked off, sterile items on a life checklist that would unequivocally demonstrate her successful transition to motherhood. I, too, yearned for children, but her clinical, detached approach deeply troubled me. When I attempted to discuss the kind of parents we hoped to become, the core values we wished to instill, the authentic childhood experiences we dreamed of creating, she would abruptly redirect to purely practical concerns: the required square footage for a growing family home, the astronomical cost of quality childcare, whether her firm offered adequate parental leave. The emotional, intangible dimensions of parenthood seemed utterly irrelevant to her meticulous planning. We argued fiercely about this once, a rare, volatile moment when I chose to push back against her instead of retreating into myself. I asked her, point blank, if she actually wanted to be a mother, or if she simply desired to have children because that was what everyone in her meticulously curated social circle did. Her response was a chillingly precise cut. She retorted that not everyone approached major life decisions with reckless emotion, and that some people understood the value of planning. She then acidly asked what, precisely, I had ever planned successfully, and the question hung between us like the acrid smoke from a fire neither of us dared to acknowledge. I started sleeping in the guest room occasionally, not every night, but often enough that it became a silent, accepted norm. Danielle never commented on this chilling development, which, in its silence, told me everything I needed to know about how little she valued my presence in her bed. The lottery ticket was an impulsive, almost accidental purchase. It was a bitterly cold Tuesday in November, 3 years into our fractured marriage, and I'd stopped at a gas station after completing a routine job site inspection. The colossal jackpot sign glowed with an almost taunting brilliance in the window, advertising some astronomical number I'd never seriously considered winning. I bought a quick-pick ticket along with my coffee, stuffed it casually into my jacket pocket, and promptly forgot about its very existence. 3 days later, I rediscovered the ticket while doing laundry. The drawing had occurred the previous night, and I'd pulled up the winning numbers on my phone, more out of sheer boredom than any genuine hope. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably by the third matching number. By the sixth, I was slumped on the laundry room floor, utterly convinced I was experiencing a vivid hallucination. I drove to the Lottery Commission office the next morning, still enveloped in a fog of disbelief, and watched as they meticulously verified the ticket. The official, with the practiced, unsettling calm of someone who delivered such life-altering news countless times before, looked at me. He confirmed I'd won the $5 million jackpot, which would amount to approximately $3.2 million after taxes if I opted for the lump sum payout. He then asked if I needed a moment to compose myself. My very first call was to my mother. She wept tears of sheer joy. My second call was to Wesley. He first roared with laughter, then, unexpectedly, he too cried. My third call was to my accountant, a careful, methodical man named Franklin Burke, who had diligently managed my business finances. He issued a stern directive: do not do anything until we can meet in person, emphasizing the word anything with an unusual, almost desperate intensity. I didn't call Danielle. I'm still not entirely certain why. Perhaps some deeper, instinctual part of me already knew the inevitable trajectory of this revelation. Or perhaps I simply craved one solitary moment, just one, where something truly good belonged entirely to me, before the relentless machinery of our marriage inevitably converted it into yet another asset for her to manage. I sat in my truck in the Lottery Commission parking lot for almost an hour, staring blankly at the verified receipt they'd handed me. $3.2 million after taxes. The number seemed abstract, utterly disconnected from anything real, anything tangible. I thought about my mother, meticulously counting coupons at the kitchen table. I thought about Wesley, working 2 grueling jobs during college to meticulously avoid accumulating debt. I thought about every single overtime shift I'd endured, every corner I'd painstakingly cut, every small, fleeting luxury I'd ruthlessly denied myself, all in a desperate attempt to build something stable, something lasting. And then, my thoughts inevitably turned to Danielle, who had never once denied herself anything, who had never known a moment of financial worry, who had never understood the visceral fear of checking your bank balance before buying groceries. I thought about the prenup, that formidable, 23-page legal fortress sitting in my filing cabinet, a document she had so meticulously insisted upon to guard against someone like me taking advantage of someone like her. The irony was almost too perfect, too devastating, to fully process. She found out that evening when I returned home with a bottle of champagne, an indulgence that cost more than I typically spent on groceries for an entire month. I told her what had transpired. I showed her the verified ticket, still glowing with possibility. I waited for her reaction. What I received was a performance I will genuinely never forget. She screamed, a joyous, almost theatrical sound. She jumped into my arms, wrapping herself around me as if I were the most precious person in her entire world. Then, almost instantaneously, the questions began, a relentless barrage. She urgently wanted to know when we could access the money. She asked if I'd already filed the claim. She inquired about the duration of the transfer process. She mentioned, with a calculated casualness, that we should probably talk to her father's financial advisor since he'd know how to invest this properly. I watched her eyes, saw them calculate, dissect, and mentally spend money that was unequivocally not hers. A cold, hard knot of realization began to settle in my chest. Over the ensuing weeks, Danielle underwent a chilling transformation, morphing into a version of herself I had only previously glimpsed. She began compulsively browsing real estate listings for sprawling properties in neighborhoods I couldn't even pronounce. She'd strategically leave jewelry catalogs open on the kitchen counter, certain items circled in audacious red pen. She mentioned casually that her friend from law school had just redone her kitchen with Italian marble, and wouldn't it be nice to have something similar? The spending suggestions escalated with alarming speed. A brand new car, since her current one was now 3 years old. A sprawling vacation home, because everyone needs somewhere to escape. A substantial investment in her father's newest dental practice expansion, because family should support family. Every single conversation circled back to the money, my money, and how we should be using it. I visited Franklin Burke alone on a quiet Wednesday afternoon. I brought the prenup. He read it meticulously, pausing significantly at page 17, precisely as I had done 3 years earlier. When he finished, he looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. He advised me to consult a family law attorney, but in his professional opinion, the language was utterly unambiguous. He explained that the windfall clause was mutually binding and comprehensive, perfectly covering this exact scenario. He underscored that lottery winnings acquired during the marriage by one party remained the sole and separate property of that party. He then pointed out, with quiet emphasis, that there was no community property claim, no spousal entitlement, nothing. He observed, with a hint of grim satisfaction, that she had effectively written herself out of any share of this money long before I'd ever bought a ticket. I subsequently hired an attorney named Vivian Carrera to conduct an independent review of the prenup. She unequivocally confirmed Franklin's assessment. The document was ironclad. Danielle, or more accurately, her family's hypervigilant lawyer, had been so painstakingly thorough in protecting her assets that they had, with a stroke of delicious irony, inadvertently protected mine as well. The windfall clause made no distinction between who they expected to receive such gains. It simply stated, with chilling impartiality, that whoever received them, kept them. Danielle cornered me in the kitchen the following Sunday, her patience, it seemed, finally exhausted. She demanded to know, her voice sharp with accusation, when we were going to start making decisions about our money. She insisted she'd been patient, that she understood I needed time to process, but this was a partnership, and she had every right to be involved in financial planning for our future. I asked her to sit down. I retrieved the prenup from my filing cabinet, the very same document I'd signed 3 years earlier against my brother's sage advice. I opened it directly to page 17 and deliberately slid it across the table. I pointed to the specific clause and asked if she recognized this section. She glanced at it with the dismissive familiarity of someone who'd helped meticulously draft every word. She confirmed, with an exasperated sigh, that of course she recognized it, that it was the windfall protection clause. She explained it was standard in prenups like this and asked why I was bothering to show it to her. I told her, my voice unnervingly calm, to read it again, carefully this time, and to pay close attention to the precise language. I watched, with a morbid fascination, as understanding slowly dawned across her features like a grim sunrise, revealing a treacherous landscape she'd never actually seen before. The clause was, indeed, mutual. It applied equally to both parties. Any windfall received by either spouse remained solely theirs. She started shaking her head almost imperceptibly before she even finished reading. She insisted, with a desperate edge, that this wasn't what the clause meant. She argued, her voice rising, that it was designed to protect her inheritance, her potential winnings, her future assets. She declared it wasn't supposed to apply to me. I asked her simply, why not? I pointed out, with unassailable logic, that I was a party to this agreement, the same as her. I noted that I had signed it, agreed to its terms, accepted its conditions. I observed that if she won $5 million tomorrow, I wouldn't be entitled to a single cent of it. I asked her, my gaze unwavering, why she thought the reverse would be any different. Her father's furious call came within the hour. Harold Prescott's voice carried the controlled, venomous fury of a man utterly unaccustomed to having his meticulously laid plans spectacularly backfire. He accused me of callously manipulating his daughter. He threatened immediate legal action. He invoked lawyers and courts and vowed to make my life very difficult if I didn't do the right thing. I allowed him to exhaust his litany of threats. Then I informed him, with a quiet, steely resolve, that the very document his attorney drafted, the one his family so vehemently insisted I sign, the prenup that was supposed to protect Danielle from someone like me, that very document now, ironically, protected me from people like him. I suggested he discuss the matter with Gerald Whitmore, as I was quite certain the man vividly recalled drafting page 17. Harold sputtered something incoherent about lawyers and courts and ensuring I regretted this decision. I ended the call without deigning to respond to his empty threats. There was nothing more he could say that would alter the cold, unyielding legal reality of the situation, and I had already endured 3 years of listening to the Prescott family's withering opinions about my inherent inadequacy. I didn't need to hear any more. Danielle's behavior in the ensuing days alternated between desperate strategies with almost algorithmic precision. She attempted seduction first, appearing in provocative lingerie she'd never once worn during our marriage, subtly suggesting a romantic trip to reconnect as a couple. When physical enticement utterly failed, she seamlessly shifted to emotional manipulation, dissolving into theatrical tears, bemoaning how the money was destroying our relationship, begging me to remember what we'd built together. I calmly pointed out that what we'd built together amounted to a prenup that meticulously protected her from me, and her tears dried with remarkable celerity. The guilt-laden approach came next. She meticulously reminded me of all the support her family had provided over the years, the house we lived in, the connections that had ostensibly helped my business grow, the social opportunities that came with the coveted status of being a Prescott by marriage. She framed my unwavering position as profound ingratitude, a heinous betrayal of everything they'd done for me. When I challenged her to specify precisely what her family had done for me that hadn't ultimately benefited them more, she couldn't produce a single convincing answer. Her final strategy was, perhaps, the most telling, the most chilling. She threatened to utterly destroy my reputation within the community if I didn't agree to some form of settlement. She reminded me, with a sneer, that she knew people, that her family wielded significant influence. They could, she warned, make things very difficult for a small electrical contractor who depended entirely on referrals and established relationships. The woman I had married, the woman I had once believed loved me, stood in our kitchen and brazenly threatened to ruin my entire livelihood if I didn't hand over money that was, by every legal right, unequivocally mine. That raw, brutal conversation obliterated whatever lingering attachment I still harbored. You can recover from disappointment. You can, in time, process betrayal. But watching someone you thought you knew reveal themselves as chillingly willing to harm you for pure financial gain, that leaves a different, far deeper kind of scar. The inevitable meeting with Danielle's attorney, Gerald Whitmore, occurred 2 weeks later. He sat across from me in his impeccably wood-paneled office, his face meticulously neutral as Vivian Carrera, my own attorney, meticulously laid out our unassailable position. Danielle sat stiffly beside him, her posture rigid, her eyes resolutely avoiding mine. Vivian was methodical, almost surgical, in her presentation. She walked through the prenup, clause by clause, demonstrating precisely how comprehensively the Prescott family had protected their assets. She highlighted the windfall provision, explained its mutual application, and cited relevant case law that overwhelmingly supported our interpretation. She concluded by stating, with quiet authority, that there was simply no legal basis for any claim on the lottery winnings. Gerald listened, uncharacteristically, without interruption. When Vivian concluded, he turned to Danielle and uttered words I will carry with me for the remainder of my life. He told her, plainly, that the clause was clear. He stated there was nothing he could do. He explained that she had specifically requested language that would protect any unexpected financial gains from spousal claims. He acknowledged that she had desired ironclad protection, and indeed she had gotten it. He then conceded, with a heavy sigh, that unfortunately it protected him just as thoroughly as it would have protected her. Danielle looked at me then, truly looked at me, for the very first time since this entire seismic situation began. She wanted to know if I was truly going to do this. She asked if I was seriously going to use her own prenup against her. I told her, my voice devoid of emotion, that I wasn't using anything against her. I explained that I was simply honoring the agreement she had insisted we sign. I reminded her that she had wanted separate finances, protected assets, and clear legal boundaries around our money. I said I was merely giving her exactly what she had asked for. The divorce proceedings commenced the following month. Danielle cited irreconcilable differences, which, I suppose, was technically accurate. Our fundamental ideas about marriage, partnership, and basic human decency had, indeed, proven irreconcilably incompatible. She attempted various desperate angles to claim a portion of the winnings. She argued the ticket was purchased with marital funds, since I'd used cash from my wallet that technically came from our shared household. Her own prenup, however, defined our finances as meticulously separate, utterly undermining this argument. She claimed the winnings should be considered income, and therefore subject to different provisions. Yet, the document specifically listed lottery winnings as distinctly separate from earned income. She then suggested the clause was unconscionable and should be voided. The court noted that she'd had independent legal counsel, a full and lucid understanding of the terms, and had, in fact, actively helped draft the very language herself. Every argument failed. Every desperate strategy collapsed under the crushing weight of her own meticulous, self-serving planning. The court proceedings themselves were surprisingly brief, given the colossal stakes involved. Judge Eleanor Hawkins reviewed the prenuptial agreement with the methodical, almost weary patience of someone who presided over countless couples locked in bitter battles over money. She asked Gerald Whitmore to confirm that his client, Danielle, had received independent legal representation during the drafting process. He confirmed it. She asked if the terms had been fully explained to both parties. He confirmed that as well. She asked if there had been any coercion or undue pressure involved in the signing. Danielle's own attorney had to reluctantly admit that no. If anything, the pressure had flowed unequivocally in the opposite direction. Danielle made one final, desperate attempt to sway the proceedings, taking the stand to testify about our relationship. She painstakingly described herself as a devoted wife who had supported her husband's career aspirations, opened doors for him socially, and provided a stable home environment for 3 years. She painted me as a manipulative opportunist who had deceived her, hidden his true character until he possessed the resources to reveal his real colors. When my attorney, Vivian, cross-examined her, the carefully constructed narrative swiftly unraveled. Vivian asked Danielle to explain precisely how the prenup's windfall clause was supposed to function. Danielle, regaining her composure, described how it meticulously protected her potential inheritance and any prizes or unexpected gains she might receive. Vivian then, with quiet power, asked why that protection shouldn't apply equally to both parties, since the language explicitly specified either spouse. Danielle had no coherent answer. She kept desperately insisting that the clause was meant to protect her, that anyone reading it would understand the intent, that the spirit of the agreement mattered more than the technical wording. Judge Hawkins calmly interrupted, noting that courts interpret contracts based on their actual, written language, not one party's retroactive, self-serving understanding of intent. She observed that the prenup was unusually thorough and had clearly been drafted by competent counsel. She concluded that the terms were unambiguous and would be enforced as written. The final divorce decree awarded her exactly what the prenup specified, everything she brought into the marriage, and absolutely nothing of what I'd gained during it. She kept the house her parents gifted her. She kept her retirement accounts. She kept her precious separate assets. And I kept my $5 million jackpot, minus approximately $47,000 in legal fees. My mother's reaction when I conveyed the final outcome has stayed with me, a profound warmth. She said she was immensely proud of me, but not because of the money. She explained she was proud because I had never, not once, compromised who I truly was, even when it would have been immeasurably easier to simply become someone else. She observed that Danielle had spent 3 years attempting to make me feel small, and I had responded by simply being myself. Wesley helped me move into my new place, a modest house I purchased outright in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood. He pointed out that I could easily afford something far grander, and asked why I chose this one. I told him it profoundly reminded me of the apartment we grew up in. I said it felt like home. I gave my mother $200,000, enough to completely pay off her mortgage and secure a comfortable retirement. She argued at first, insisting she didn't need it, that I should save it for my future. I gently reminded her of all those arduous double shifts, all those profound sacrifices, all those years of selflessly putting Wesley and me before herself. I told her this wasn't charity, it was interest on a debt I could never truly repay. Wesley received enough to clear his student loans and establish a college fund for his twin daughters. He, too, tried to refuse, just like Mom, but I simply told him, that's what brothers do. I invested the majority of the remaining money into conservative funds, retaining enough liquid capital to expand my business and hire 2 additional electricians. The company has grown steadily since then, not solely because of the lottery money, but because I never ceased doing the work I genuinely love. Danielle reached out once, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. She sent a lengthy email, meticulously explaining that she'd had time to reflect, that she understood now how her behavior had been shaped by her upbringing, that she wanted me to know she was working on herself. She didn't directly ask for money, but the implication, insidious and undeniable, was woven subtly between her apologies and thinly veiled justifications. I didn't respond. Some doors are simply better left permanently closed. Her father attempted a different, equally transparent approach, reaching out through a mutual acquaintance to propose a business investment. The proposal was naked in its desperation. The dental practice expansion he mentioned before, now framed not as an obligation, but as a golden opportunity. I declined politely and promptly blocked his number. The last I heard, Danielle had departed the prestigious law firm and was working at her father's company in some administrative capacity. The family's vaunted financial situation, it appeared, was not nearly as stable as they had always meticulously presented. The dental practice chain had, in fact, been struggling for years, propped up by Lorraine's family money and Harold's creative accounting. Losing access to what they had clearly expected to be my $5 million contribution had merely accelerated their inexorable decline. I try not to revel in their struggles. These are, after all, human beings, flawed and misguided, but human nonetheless. Yet I'd be disingenuous if I claimed there wasn't some part of me, some small, deeply wounded part that remembered every condescending comment and dismissive glance, that felt a certain, quiet justice in how things ultimately unfolded. What I've gleaned from this profound experience extends far beyond the obvious lessons about prenups and meticulously protecting oneself legally. I learned that people will unequivocally show you who they truly are, if only you pay diligent attention. Danielle told me precisely what she thought of me when she thrust that 23-page document into my hands. She told me I wasn't trustworthy. She told me I was a risk to be meticulously managed. She told me that love, for her, came with stringent conditions, ironclad protections, and convenient escape clauses. I should have listened. Instead, I tragically convinced myself that signing her terms was an act of profound love, incontrovertible proof that I didn't care about money, or security, or fair treatment. I fatally confused self-sacrifice with devotion. I naively believed that relinquishing my rights would somehow prove my worth. It didn't. It merely made me easier to control. For anyone reading this who might be facing a similar crossroads, I offer the earnest advice my brother once gave me, advice I was then too stubborn to heed. If someone necessitates a legal fortress to protect themselves from you before you've even begun to build a life together, they are not planning a genuine partnership. They are planning an occupation. They are telling you, in documented and notarized detail, that they fully expect you to eventually become the enemy. Believe them. I'm dating again cautiously, with a newfound wisdom. I met someone through a contractors networking event, a remarkable woman named Grace who runs her own painting company. She knows about the lottery money, and her first, refreshingly honest reaction was to make a joke about how I should invest in better work boots, since mine were literally falling apart. She treats me like a person, a complex individual, not a mere financial portfolio. It's truly remarkable how refreshing basic decency feels after 3 years of being perpetually treated like a liability. My business is thriving. My family is unequivocally happy. I possess enough financial security to live comfortably, without ever again worrying about making rent or affording crucial healthcare. By any reasonable measure, I am in a far better position now than I ever dared to imagine. Yet, sometimes late at night, I still reflect on the man who signed that prenup 3 years ago. I think about his boundless hope, his naive optimism, his desperate, yearning desire to prove that love could indeed surmount any obstacle. I want to whisper to him that he wasn't wrong to believe in the transformative power of love. I want to tell him that his only profound mistake was believing in someone who simply didn't deserve it. The prenup Danielle so vehemently demanded wasn't truly about protecting her assets. It was, I now understand, about meticulously establishing a rigid hierarchy within our marriage even before it began. She was always destined to be the one with resources, with options, with unquestionable power. I was always intended to be the one grateful for her fleeting attention, dependent on her capricious approval, trapped by her conditional generosity. The lottery money, however, irrevocably shifted everything because it shattered the delicate balance she'd so carefully constructed. Suddenly, I possessed something she wanted. Suddenly, I wielded leverage. And suddenly, her true, unvarnished feelings about our partnership became utterly impossible to conceal. She didn't love me. She loved the idea of me, the working-class husband she could display like a gleaming trophy, irrefutable evidence of her own open-mindedness and willingness to look past something as trivial as socioeconomic background. I was merely a character in her meticulously crafted narrative, never a person with my own unfolding story. When I won that money, I stopped fitting the predetermined role she'd cast me in. And that, in its cruel irony, was when she realized she'd built the very trap she'd eventually fall into. I don't know what Danielle tells people about our divorce. I don't know if she candidly admits that her own prenup backfired spectacularly, or if she's painstakingly constructed some alternative, self-serving narrative where I somehow deceived her. It doesn't matter. The court records exist. The document exists. The undeniable truth exists, regardless of whatever story she chooses to tell. As for me, I am simply, profoundly grateful. Grateful for a mother who, by example, taught me that character matters infinitely more than circumstances. Grateful for a brother who, despite my stubbornness, tirelessly attempted to warn me. Grateful for a random, fleeting impulse at a gas station that irrevocably altered the trajectory of my entire life. And yes, I am profoundly grateful for page 17 of that prenuptial agreement, meticulously drafted by Gerald Whitmore, Esquire, whose zealous attention to protecting the Prescott family fortune inadvertently provided the precise legal framework for my own hard-won independence. The windfall clause was intended to protect her from me. Instead, it protected me from her. I never thought I'd be extending gratitude to my ex-wife for anything, but I will, unequivocally, give credit where it is due. That prenup was, ironically, the best thing she ever gave me. She just didn't know it at the time. None of us did.